Welcome, dear listeners, to another descent into the abyss on the shadow behind you. I am your guide through the veil of forgotten histories, where the past doesn't merely whisper, it claws at the edges of your sanity, pulling you into realms where light fears to tread. Tonight, we venture into the frost-bitten heart of the American wilderness, a place where the trees stand as silent sentinels, guarding secrets that have devoured men whole. Our tale unfolds in the year 1883, a time when the frontier was still a raw wound on the map, bleeding ambition and despair in equal measure. Imagine, if you will, the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana, a jagged spine of rock and forest, where winters descend like a predator's jaw, snapping shut on the unwary. Snowdrifts pile higher than a man's head, winds howl with the fury of vengeful spirits, and the darkness, oh, the darkness is not empty, it watches. It hungers. Picture this: 27 hardy souls, trappers forged in the crucible of the wild, gather at the edge of civilization. They are men of leather and sinew, their faces etched with scars from bear claws and frostbite, their eyes gleaming with the promise of fortune in beaver pelts and mink hides. The fur trade, though waning like a dying ember, still lured the bold into the depths. Led by Elias Blackwood, a grizzled veteran whose legend preceded him like a storm cloud, they set out from the fledgling town of Missoula, their mules laden with traps, rifles and provisions for a season's hunt. Blackwood, with his mane of salt and pepper hair and a voice like grinding gravel, had trapped these lands since the days when Lewis and Clark's echoes still lingered in the valleys. He spoke of rich valleys teeming with game, of streams where beaver dams rose like fortresses, but beneath his bravado lurked a shadow, a whisper of old tales from the Salish people, warnings of places where the earth itself swallowed the living. As they plunged into the Bitterroot Range, the world transformed. The trail narrowed to a thread, winding through stands of ponderosa pine that towered like ancient gods, their bark cracked and weeping resin in the cold. The air grew thick, laced with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a perfume that masked something fuller beneath, like the rot of unspoken graves. Snow began to fall, soft at first, like a lover's caress, then relentless, blanketing the ground in a shroud of white that muffled all sound, save the crunch of boots and the labored breaths of man and beast. They aimed for Blackwater Creek, a remote hollow known only to the most seasoned trappers, where legends spoke of bountiful traps, but also of strange mists that rose at dusk, carrying voices on the wind, voices that mimicked the cries of lost loved ones. Days turned to a blur of exertion. The men shared stories around flickering campfires, their flames dancing like trapped spirits, casting elongated shadows that seemed to reach beyond the light's grasp. There was young Thomas Hale, barely 20, with dreams of striking it rich to buy a homestead for his sweetheart back east. Old Man Greer, whose arthritis twisted his fingers like gnarled roots, yet whose aim with a rifle was unerring. And then there was Silas Crow, the enigmatic half-Salish guide, whose dark eyes held the weight of ancestral knowledge, muttering prayers to spirits the white men dismissed as superstition. Laughter echoed, but it was brittle, edged with the unease that comes from venturing too far from the known. By the 9th day, they reached the basin, a vast, bowl-shaped depression ringed by sheer cliffs, where Blackwater Creek snaked through like a vein of ink. The camp rose swiftly, tents pitched in a ragged circle, fires kindled against the encroaching night, traps set along the water's edge. The men reveled in the abundance. Beaver signs were everywhere, tracks crisscrossing the snow like cryptic runes. But as the sun dipped below the ridges, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple, a hush fell over the land. No birds sang, no animals stirred, only the creek's murmur, a low, insidious whisper that seemed to speak in tongues. That first night a fog rolled in from the north, thick and cloying, wrapping the camp in its embrace. Men shifted uneasily in their bedrolls, rifles close at hand. Whispers began, faint at first, like leaves rustling, then clearer names called out in the dark, pleas for help that echoed from the trees. One trapper, Jeremiah Knox, swore he saw a figure at the forest's edge, a tall, emaciated silhouette with eyes that glowed like embers. He raised his gun, but when the mist parted, nothing remained but trampled snow and an unnatural chill that seeped into bones. As the days wore on, the anomalies mounted. Traps vanished overnight, only to reappear miles away, bait untouched but smeared with a viscous slime that reeked of decay. Footprints encircled the camp, human-like, yet elongated with claws that scored the earth. The men grew irritable, accusations flying like sparks from a flint. Blackwood tried to maintain order, his commands barked into the void, but doubt crept in like frost through cracks. Silas Crow warned of the Wendigo, a spirit of insatiable hunger from Algonquian lore, said to haunt these woods, driving men to madness and cannibalism. The others scoffed, attributing the strangeness to cabin fever or bad whiskey. But then the disappearances started. First it was Hale, the young dreamer, who wandered off to check his lines and never returned. Searches yielded only his hat, torn and bloodied, hanging from a branch like a macabre trophy. Then Greer, vanishing in the night with a scream that pierced the soul, his tent shredded as if by talons. Panic simmered, bubbling into fear as the group dwindled. The survivors huddled closer, their fires blazing defiantly, but the shadows grew bolder, encroaching with every flicker. And now, dear listener, as the wind howls outside your window, imagine yourself there, in that cursed basin, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs. What force lurked in those woods? A beast of flesh and fur, a curse woven into the land's very fabric, or something older, primordial, that feeds on the hubris of men who dare to claim the wild. Stay with me, for the tale of the lost hunting camp is just beginning. It will chill your blood, question your sanity, and remind you that some shadows, they follow you home. Let us delve deeper now into the heart of the narrative, where the threads of fate begin to unravel. It was October of 1883 when the expedition assembled in Missoula, a rough, hewn outpost clinging to the edge of the wilderness like a barnacle on a ship's hull. The air was crisp, carrying the tang of wood smoke from chimneys and the metallic promise of impending snow. Elias Blackwood, at 52, was the undisputed leader, a man whose reputation stretched from the Missouri River to the Pacific. Born in the shadow of the Appalachians, he had chased the fur trade west, surviving Indian skirmishes, avalanches, and the brutal winters that claimed lesser souls. His face was a map of hardships, a jagged scar from a grizzly's swipe bisected his cheek, and his left hand missed 2 fingers, lost to frostbite in 72. Yet his presence commanded respect. When he spoke, men listened, his voice a rumble that echoed authority. Gathered around him were 26 others, a motley crew drawn by the lure of profit. There was Thomas Hale, the greenhorn from Boston, his eyes wide with adventure, his pack stuffed with letters from his fiancée, Amelia. Hale dreamed of pelts that would fund a life of comfort, far from the soot-choked factories of the East. Opposite him sat Old Man Greer, 70 a day, a relic of the old Rendezvous days, his beard a tangled thicket, hiding a perpetual scowl. Greer trapped not for wealth, but for the solitude, claiming the woods spoke to him in ways civilization never could. Silas Crow, the half-breed guide, was an enigma wrapped in buckskin. Son of a Salish mother and a Scottish trader father, he navigated the Bitterroots with an uncanny intuition, his dark hair braided with eagle feathers, his neck adorned with a pendant of carved bone. A ward against evil, he said. Crow rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried the weight of prophecy. The mountains remember, he'd murmur, staring into the fire as if seeing ghosts dance in the flames. The rest were a blend of veterans and opportunists, Irish immigrants like Patrick O'Malley with his quick wit and quicker temper, French-Canadian voyageurs such as Jean-Luc Dubois, whose songs lightened the trail, and hardened locals like the brothers Harlan and Zeke Thorne. Inseparable twins whose rifles were extensions of their arms. They numbered 27 in all, their gear a symphony of clanking traps, oiled firearms and bundled furs from prior hauls. The journey began at dawn, the party snaking along the Clark Fork River before veering south into the Bitterroots. The trail was treacherous, Narrow ledges slick with dew, roots tripping like hidden snares, streams swollen from autumn rains. Mules brayed in protest, their hooves sinking into mud that smelled of earth and decay. As they ascended, the forest closed in, pines and firs interlocking branches overhead, filtering sunlight into dappled patterns that played tricks on the eyes. The air grew cooler, laced with the resinous scent of evergreens and the faint, underlying musk of wildlife. Conversations flowed like the rivers they crossed, tales of past hunts, boasts of narrow escapes. Blackwood regaled them with stories of the 40s, when beaver hats ruled fashion and fortunes were made overnight. The land gives, but it takes, he'd say, his pipe smoke curling like spectral fingers. Hale listened raptly, sketching maps in his journal, while Greer grumbled about the damned railroads encroaching on their domain. By the third day, signs of unease emerged. A mule went lame, its leg twisted in a burrow that seemed too perfectly placed. That night, around the campfire, a howl pierced the darkness. Not wolf, not coyote, but something guttural, almost human. Crow stiffened, his hand straying to his knife. "Not animal," he whispered. "Spirit." The men laughed it off, attributing it to wind or imagination, but sleep came fitfully, dreams haunted by pursuing shadows. Pressing on, they crossed Lolo Pass, where snow flurries began, dusting their shoulders like ashes from a funeral pyre. The landscape grew more foreboding. Cliffs loomed like judgmental titans, valleys plunged into abyssal depths, wildlife abounded. Elk tracks, bear scat, but an odd silence prevailed, as if the animals watched from hiding. On the 7th day, they descended into Elkhorn Basin, a hidden gem ringed by peaks that pierced the sky. Blackwater Creek gleamed like a black ribbon, its waters cold and unyielding. The camp was established with efficiency, tents in a defensive ring, a central fire pit dug deep, traps deployed along beaver runs. The men cheered as the first catches came in, plump beavers with lustrous fur, promising riches. But as twilight descended, the atmosphere shifted. The creek's babble took on a mocking tone, and mist rose from the ground, swirling like restless souls. That evening, Hale reported seeing lights in the woods, flickering orbs that danced just beyond reach. O'Malley joked about Willow, the wisps, but Crow shook his head. "They lead to death," he intoned. The first anomaly struck on the 10th day. Dubois returned from his trap line empty, handed, his gear strewn as if by a tempest. "Something followed me," he gasped, his face pale as moonlight. Footprints trailed him, large, misshapen, ending abruptly at the camp's edge. Blackwood dismissed it as a prank, but tension coiled like a spring. Nights grew longer, the cold more penetrating, seeping through layers to chill the marrow. Whispers echoed, names, pleas, laughter that curdled blood. Knox, the skeptic, ventured out one pre-dawn to investigate, returning shaken, claiming a figure mimicked his movements from the trees. The disappearances commenced subtly. Hale was first, his absence noted at roll call. Searches revealed his rifle abandoned, barrel bent impossibly. Blood speckled the snow, leading to a cliff where tracks vanished. Grief mingled with fear, accusations flew. Was it Indians, a rival party, or something worse? Greer followed, his scream rending the night. His tent was ravaged, shreds hanging like flayed skin, his body gone, only a trail of gore leading into the fog. The camp descended into paranoia. Men slept in shifts, rifles cocked, but the shadows pressed closer, whispering secrets that drove wedges between them. As the veil of normalcy tore further, the lost hunting camp became a cauldron of terror, where sanity frayed like worn rope. By the 15th day, 5 men had vanished. Hale, Greer, Dubois, and the Thorne brothers, swallowed by the wilderness without trace. The survivors clustered tighter, their fires a desperate beacon against the encroaching dark. Blackwood, his authority cracking, rallied them with promises of rescue, but his eyes betrayed doubt, darting to the trees as if expecting ambush. Silas Crow became the voice of foreboding, gathering the men under a moonless sky. "This is no ordinary place," he said, his voice a low chant. "The Salish call it Sikam Kewin, the Valley of Shadows. Long ago my ancestor spoke of a curse, a spirit born of famine, twisted by greed. It wears the skin of the lost, feeds on fear. The men shifted uncomfortably, some crossing themselves, others gripping amulets. O'Malley scoffed, but his laughter rang hollow. Strange phenomena escalated. Traps yielded horrors, beavers with human-like eyes, pelts inscribed with symbols that burned to the touch. Food stores rotted overnight, maggots writhing in patterns resembling faces. And the sounds! Oh, the sounds! Groans from the earth as if the ground itself agonized. Laughter echoing from cliffs, mimicking the voices of the missing. On the 18th day, a blizzard struck, winds shrieking like banshees, snow piling in drifts that buried tents. Huddled in the largest shelter, the men shared tales to stave off madness. Knox recounted a childhood ghost story, but it paled against their reality. Suddenly, a scratch at the flap slowed deliberate. Blackwood flung it open, rifle raised, but only swirling white greeted him. Yet in the morning, claw marks scarred the canvas, deep enough to draw blood. The 9th disappearance was O'Malley. He stepped out to relieve himself, his lantern bobbing like a firefly. A cry cut short, then silence. The search party found his boots, upright in the snow, filled with frozen blood, as if he'd been yanked skyward. Panic erupted. Accusations turned violent, fists flew, knives drawn. Blackwood intervened, but the group splintered, some advocating flight, others insisting on waiting out the storm. Crow performed a ritual, burning sage that filled the air with acrid smoke, chanting in Salish tongue. For a moment, peace descended, but it was illusory. That night, visions plagued them. Knox awoke screaming, claiming Greer stood over him, flesh hanging in tatters, begging for mercy. Others reported similar hauntings. The missing returned as apparitions, eyes hollow, mouths stretched in silent howls. By the 25th day, only 15 remained. They abandoned the basin, trekking north through knee-deep snow. But the curse followed. Trees seemed to shift, paths looping back to the camp. Exhaustion set in, hallucinations blurring lines. One man, delirious, stripped naked and ran into the woods, laughing maniacally. The climax came on a ridge overlooking the valley. A figure emerged from the mist, tall, gaunt, antlered like a stag, skin pale as bone, eyes burning red. It moved with unnatural grace, limbs elongated, claws dripping ichor. The men fired, bullets passing harmlessly as it vanished in smoke. In the chaos, more fell, torn apart by invisible forces, dragged screaming into underbrush. Blackwood, wounded, led the remnants onward, Crow at his side. They stumbled upon a cave seeking shelter, but inside, walls etched with ancient drawings depicted similar horrors. Men devoured by shadow beasts. Emerging days later, only 9 survived: Blackwood, Crow, Knox, and 6 others, emaciated, frostbitten, minds shattered. They reached Missoula weeks overdue, babbling of monsters and curses. Authorities dismissed them as mad, attributing losses to weather or bears. But the survivors knew better. The shadow had marked them. In the years following, they withered suicides, vanishings, madness. Blackwood died raving about the hunger that walks. Crow returned to his people, warning of disturbed spirits. The camp, explorers found it abandoned, tents intact but blood-soaked, bones scattered, human, gnawed clean. To truly grasp the chill of this tale, we must peel back the layers of time, examining the historical tapestry that wove this nightmare. The year 1883 sits at the twilight of the American fur trade, an era that began with Lewis and Clark's 1804 expedition, opening the West to exploitation. Montana, then a territory, was a frontier crucible where fortunes rose and fell on the backs of beavers. The Bitterroot Valley, home to the Salish, Flathead people, had long been a crossroads of trade and conflict. The fur trade peaked in the 1820s, 1840s, with companies like the American Fur Company dominating. Trappers, often solitary mountain men, roamed the Rockies, harvesting beaver for hats coveted in Europe. By the 1880s, however, the industry waned. Beavers overhunted, silk replacing felt. Yet pockets persisted. Men like our trappers turned to diverse furs: mink, otter, fox. Economic desperation drove them. Post-Civil War migration, railroad booms displacing livelihoods. The Bitterroots were perilous, harsh winters with temperatures plunging to 40°F, avalanches, grizzlies. Disappearances were common. Records from the Montana Historical Society note numerous lost parties. In 1870, a group of prospectors vanished near Lolo Pass, bodies never found. Native interactions added tension. The Salish, displaced by treaties like Hellgate's 1855, harbored resentments. Skirmishes occurred, though by 1883 reservations confined them. Folklore enriches the eerie Salish legends speak of stick Indians, or shape, shifters lurking in woods. Borrowed from Algonquian tribes via trade, the Wendigo, a cannibal spirit born of starvation, fits perfectly. Winters in the Rockies bred such myths. The Donner Party 1846 exemplified real cannibalism horrors. Cultural trauma underscores this. Colonization disrupted indigenous balances, perhaps awakening metaphorical spirits. European settlers dismissed native warnings, their hubris inviting doom. Archaeological sites in the Bitterroots reveal ancient petroglyphs depicting horned figures, possibly shamanic visions. Blend fact with folklore. Reports from 1880s newspapers detail odd events, unexplained lights, strange tracks. The Bitterroot monster, sightings in the 1890s echo our tale psychologically. Isolation-induced, cabin fever, hallucinations from malnutrition, scurvy, beriberi. This context lends authenticity, blurring lines between history and horror, suggesting the lost camp isn't mere fiction, but an echo of real perils where the wild reclaims its due. Beneath the surface of this chilling saga lies a labyrinth of symbols and psyches, connecting to primal fears that stalk humanity's soul. At its core, the lost hunting camp embodies man's eternal struggle against nature, a theme as old as Eden, where paradise turns predatory. The wilderness, vast and indifferent, mirrors our subconscious, untamed desires, buried traumas erupting like the story's shadows. Symbolically, the Wendigo represents greed's corruption. In folklore, it afflicts those who consume human flesh, growing hungrier with each bite. Our trappers, driven by profit, invade sacred lands, their traps metaphors for exploitation. The disappearances symbolize consumption by capitalism, colonialism, or inner demons. The 9 survivors scarred embody survivors' guilt, their tales dismissed as madness, highlighting society's rejection of uncomfortable truths. Psychologically, isolation breeds horror. Sensory deprivation in the snowbound basin induces paranoia, hallucinations, akin to modern studies on polar expeditions. The whispers. Auditory pareidolia, minds filling voids with fears. Yet thematically, it probes human nature under duress. Camaraderie crumbles into suspicion, echoing Lord of the Flies or Heart of Darkness. Culturally, it reflects American trauma. The frontier myth romanticizes conquest, but conceals costs, native displacement, environmental ravage. The Salish curse invokes post-colonial guilt, a shadow as repressed history returning to haunt. Universal fears abound. The unknown, lurking just beyond firelight, taps into evolutionary dread of predators. The emaciated figure evokes body horror, our fragility against entropy. Thematically, it questions reality. What if the supernatural is psychological projection, or vice versa? In an ominous lens, this connects to modern vanishings. National parks, missing persons cases, like in Missing 411, suggest patterns defying explanation. It warns of hubris. Technological arrogance blinds us to ancient forces. Ultimately, the story haunts because it mirrors our shadows, the darkness we carry, ready to consume when we stray too far. As our journey through the frost-veiled horrors of 1883 draws to a close, let the echoes linger like mist in the pines. The mystery of the lost hunting camp remains unsolved, a gaping wound in history's flesh, where 27 entered the maw of the Bitterroots and only 9 emerged, forever altered. Elias Blackwood's final words, scrawled in a journal found clutched in his lifeless hands, speak volumes. The shadow walks not behind, but within. It hungers eternal. What became of the vanished? Bones scattered to the winds, souls trapped in eternal torment? Or did they transcend, becoming one with the curse that claimed them? The survivors' fates offer no solace. Knox institutionalized, raving of antlered demons, Crow vanishing into the reservations, his warnings unheeded, the others succumbing to suicides that whispered of pursued phantoms. Dear listener, as you extinguish your light tonight, ponder this: the wilderness endures, its secrets buried deep. In the quiet hours, when wind rattles your panes, listen closely. Is that merely branches scratching, or something older calling your name? The shadow behind you, it never truly leaves. Thank you for joining me on The Shadow Behind You. Until next time, remember, some stories don't end. They follow you home.